Hello, this is Chuck Ridgway, Automation Technology Manager at Horner. Thanks once again for joining us for another Tuesday live stream. We think we have a fun and informative topic for you today. Here is our topic: using a 5G cellular modem with Horner OCS. Now, there are a variety of reasons why you might want to use a cellular modem or router with a Horner OCS all-in-one controller, and we'll talk what some of those reasons may be in a little bit. But today's going to be a little bit different in that it's a little bit like a video white paper, as I'm going to show you how to use a particular cellular router with a Horner OCS all-in-one controller, but really what I show you should apply to other modems and other cellular routers as well. All right, let's take a look at how we're going to break down today's topic. We're going to talk about why would you use a cellular router or cellular modem with an OCS. We're going to talk about the differences between those two components. What is the difference between a cellular modem and a cellular router? We've got an example cellular router that we'll review with you. We'll talk about setting up both the router and Cscape so that we can do our demonstrations. All right, let's get started. Okay, so why use cellular with an OCS? Well, there's a couple big issues. One would be remote applications. Applications where the machine is located in a remote location where the only option for network connectivity is probably cellular and maybe satellite, and satellite's very expensive. So that's a scenario where cellular might be a great option. Another one is for mobile applications where the machine is moving around. And if it's moving around beyond just a campus or a site, for instance, then Wi-Fi isn't really practical. So at that stage, you pretty much are looking at cellular as your main option when the machine's moving around a bit. Okay, so there's a couple use cases for cellular with an OCS. Now let's talk about the differences between a cellular modem and a cellular router. So a cellular modem provides a network connection to a single device, so a single OCS device, for instance. And traditionally, cellular modems often provide a serial type interface, kind of an old school RS-485 or RS-232 interface, or maybe USB. Sometimes Ethernet as well, but usually serial or USB. Whereas a cellular router can provide network connection to multiple devices. Okay, not just a single device, but multiple devices, and they almost always provide an Ethernet interface, often with a built-in switch. Now, during today's session, we're going to be talking about a few things that I want to review with you, a few terms that I want to review with you, because we want to keep these straight today for best understanding. When we talk about LAN address, we're talking about the IP address used to access a component like an OCS on the local area network. Not over the internet, but the local area network. And those LAN addresses often begin with 192.168 or maybe 10.10. We're also going to talk about WAN addresses, and WAN stands for Wide Area Network. And those would be the IP address we would use to access an OCS from the internet or outside the local area network. So the IP addresses are going to be, more unique than those local area addresses would be. Also, we're going to talk about ports. What are ports? Well, ports are used by TCP to represent an application or service-specific endpoint identifier. So when you're using certain applications on TCP, say a web browser, for instance, web browsers use a particular port. They use port 80 over TCP. If you're doing Modbus communications instead over the internet, they use IP port 502. So that's how different applications, if you will, differentiate different endpoints for their message over TCP. All right, now let's talk about the example cellular router that we're going to be using today in our demonstrations. And keep in mind, there's many commercially available products that will work beautifully with an OCS. We do recommend that if you use a modem or a router, that you choose one that interfaces with the OCS over Ethernet. It just gives you the full capability of the OCS from a communication standpoint. You can use multiple protocols simultaneously. It's just a really nice way to go. And we've used, here in our testing and here in our example applications, we've used modems and routers from many different companies. Multitech certainly comes to mind. That's not one we're going to show you today, but we've definitely used their routers before in the past. But today we're going to show you a Peplink 5G cellular router. Now let's take a look at what this router has from a feature standpoint. It's very full capability, frankly. It has a built-in modem, of course, for the cellular interface, and it has 2 antenna connections for cellular. So what that means is it has diversity capability in that you can have up to 2 different antennas to improve your reception, because the cellular interface has the ability to choose the strongest signal between the 2 and even switch back and forth between the 2. So that can be a big advantage for sure. Also, it has Wi-Fi built in, so it's a Wi-Fi access point. So not only is it interfacing with the cellular network, but it's also providing a local Wi-Fi network as well, which can be useful for sure. The other thing it provides is a built-in switch. So because of that, you can connect multiple devices, multiple OCSs, or maybe an OCS and an intelligent drive, whatever the case may be. And of course, you can connect it to an external switch and get even more devices connected. But by having that built-in switch, that's really convenient. Now let's take a look at our system diagram for what we're going to be demonstrating today. I've got the Peplink cellular router, and it has a internet address that starts with 166.201. All right. It also has a local area network that it provides, which the OCS is connected to. And that OCS has an IP address of 192.168.50.128. So that's a local area network. That's a LAN address. And then also on that LAN, the cellular router also sits on that LAN as well, and it talks using 192.168.50.1. Okay, so that's kind of our system diagram for our router with a single OCS. All right, now how do we access the OCS? What addresses do we use when we want to talk to the OCS? Well, it all depends where we're located relative to the machine. So if we're within range of the machine, so we're right there with the machine, maybe during development, or maybe just when we happen to be servicing the machine, or it's parked at headquarters, whatever the case may be. When we're within range of that machine and we can access the local area network, then we can just talk to the OCS using the LAN address, that 192.168 address, all right? However, if we're separated from the machine and the machine is located away from us and we don't have easy access to the local area network, then we need to access the OCS over the internet. So in that scenario, we're going to be using the internet address for the OCS, which in our example today starts with 166.201. Now, what are the types of things we can do, whether it's local over the internet? Well, basically anything that we do over Ethernet. So it can include things like Cscape troubleshooting, maybe Cscape programming. We can use WebMI with this scenario. We can do FTP file transfers. The OCS can send out emails and we can receive them even if we're not anywhere close to the local area network of the machine. So it's really pretty full-featured. Now, of course, there is some setup in Cscape that's required, but the beauty of using a cellular router or a cellular modem that has an Ethernet connection is that suddenly you have all the Ethernet services potentially available to you, okay? And the setup, frankly, is identical to what you would do in a factory environment. You need to set the IP address, you need to set the net mask, you need to set up which protocols you want to support, all those sorts of things. But there is one thing that is extra critical when you're using the OCS with a cellular device, and that is you're going to be communicating with that OCS from time to time over the internet. That means if the OCS is going to be communicating over the internet, it needs to have a default gateway programmed into it. Whereas in a factory environment, if the OCS is never communicating over the internet, that default gateway field can just be left at 0.0.0.0. However, in this application with a cellular router or a cellular modem, you're going to want to make sure that you set that default gateway to whatever the LAN address is for the router. So in this case, in our example, I believe it's 192.168.50 .1. There, of course, is setup to be done on the router as well. And in general, it's going to vary, of course, manufacturer to manufacturer. But one of the things you need to do when you're talking about a cellular router is that a router is a device that is configured to be able to manage access to multiple devices, multiple local devices. So that means it needs to know where to route any internet messages that come in and out, which local controller, if you have multiple OCSs, for instance, or maybe that OCS and that intelligent drive, which device does the router actually send each message to, depending on what the message is? Well, the routing capability is what really often needs to be configured into a cellular router. Okay, there can often be other configuration required as well, but that tends to vary from manufacturer to manufacturer and application to application. If you're talking about a cellular router, almost certainly you're going to have to do port forwarding, which is the process that you use to set up a router to forward the appropriate messages to the appropriate controllers. Some popular port numbers that are used for different applications. Cscape uses port 18502 over TCP. Modbus uses port 502. HTTP, or your web browsers, typically use port 80, and FTP typically uses port 20 or port 21. Okay, so now we've got enough preliminary information. Now we're ready to start our demonstration. And today's going to be a fun demonstration. It's kind of complex. I'm moving cables around in terms of switching my computer from being on the local area network, like I'm close to the machine, and then I'll be switching it over to the internet, whereas if I'm simulating that I'm far away from the machine and communicating over the internet. So hopefully I'll do all the cable switching properly, but it should be a lot of fun doing this live without a net. So let's take a look at the first demonstration we're going to do for you, and that is where, just like we've shown you on the screen already, we've got a router that has cellular reception and a local area network, and it's initially going to be connected to just a single OCS, providing the internet access and the communications capability to that single OCS. All right, so let's take a look at that to start with. Let's take a look at our physical equipment. So I'm going to move to the overhead view here. Okay, and so you're taking a look at my bench. So we've got my XL4 here, which is my Epoxymatic machine, and I'm taking the Epoxymatic mobile, so that's why I need a cellular interface for the Epoxymatic. All right, and then I have my Peplink cellular router here, and let's take a quick look at this guy. On this side, you can see all the local area connections here, along with a DC connection for DC power. This unit has wide range DC power. And then on this side is where we have all of our RF communications. So we've got our cellular antennas here, and there's two of them. So the modem the built-in modem can use whatever signal is strongest at any given moment. We've also got a Wi-Fi antenna for a local Wi-Fi network. And then this particular one also features a GPS antenna. So for my mobile Epoxymatic, I can always tell where it's located through that built-in GPS capability. Okay, so that's the physical equipment that we have here. Now let's head to Cscape and take a look at the configuration in Cscape. All right, so this isn't Cscape. This is actually the configuration for the router. But let's go ahead and switch over to Cscape. Here we are. And as I mentioned before in the slides, it's really just a matter of setting up Ethernet like you normally would. Now, in this first scenario, I'm physically located close to the machine. So I'm actually on the local area network for the machine. And so that's why you can see I have a local connection. And if you took a look at, let's go ahead and do it. If we take a look at the controller connection wizard and see how we're currently connected, you can see that we're currently talking to the OCS through its LAN address, okay? Because again, we're physically located close to the machine, which we would be if we're going ahead and configuring it for operation. So let's head into our hardware configuration, and really it's all about LAN 1 config. Since I'm using an XL4, I've only got one network to configure, and that's the one that is connected to my cellular router. So here you go. You can see I've got my IP address, my net mask, and I do have my gateway configured. Okay, so that's critically important when you're talking about cellular. You do have to have that gateway configured. All right, so that is configured, which is something a little different than what you might find in a factory type configuration where you might leave these at all zeros. And then down here I've selected the different Ethernet protocols that I want to use. I want to use Modbus Slave, I want to use FTP for file transfers, I want to use NTP protocol so I can keep my time synchronized. That all looks good. Now I didn't check HTTP here even though I'm using WebMI, and that's because this is our legacy web server capability. WebMI, of course, is configured in the graphics editor in Cscape. So up here in WebMI, that's where I configured, I validated my WebMI license. That's where I went ahead and published my web pages to removable media. I made sure that I had my user security configured so I would have login credentials. All those sorts of things are configuration that's required if I'm going to use WebMI with my application. Okay, so I've got that all configured there as well. All right, so that's the configuration on the OCS side of things in Cscape. Now let's go ahead and head back to my web browser, because my web browser is what's used to configure the cellular router. And let's go ahead and head back to the main page, which is called the dashboard in the case of the PepLink. And it's showing us that we're connected to AT&T over LTE connection. So that's our cellular connection. That's our WAN connection to the World Wide Web, to the internet. We've also got a local Wi-Fi network that's available to us as well. And we have a local wired network. It's all one network, but we have a wireless access point built in to provide access to this local network, which in the case of the router has an IP address of 192.168.50.1. Okay, now as I mentioned before, if we want this router to know where to send the messages when they come in, if we're talking WebMI type web browser messages or maybe Cscape for troubleshooting purposes, we need to tell the router where to direct the messages, and we do that through the port forwarding capability. And in a lot of devices, including this particular device, port forwarding is under Advanced. So if you click on the Advanced tab and you look over here on the left, you'll see port forwarding. So what we have here is we have the ports that we're interested in using in our application. Okay, so we've got FTP, we've got HTTP, which is web browsing like WebMI. We've got Modbus communications, we've got Cscape communication. So we've got the ports that are appropriate for each of those particular protocols. We've got those ports mapped so that as the messages come in over the cellular interface, they get directed to our OCS because that's the IP address of the OCS. So when we try and communicate over WebMI, everything's just gonna work. That's really what we're after. So now let me go ahead and demonstrate using WebMI on the local area network. So I'm still, next to my machine, I'm still logged in to the local area network. Let me go ahead and open up another tab with my web browser, and I'm going to use the local address, the local LAN address of my OCS so I can access WebMI. Okay, so there we go. It's asking for my login credentials. These were programmed into Cscape. So I use my login credentials. All right, and boom, here you go. Immediately I'm prompted to accept the license. And you can see how snappy everything is. That's obvious that we're right next to the machine, right on the local area network. Here's the controls for my Poxymatic, which is going mobile. I can go ahead in here and I can change my material from rocket rosin to runny rosin, hit OK, and I can go ahead and kick off a batch if that's what I want to do, and I can see full capability. Everything looks good here. All right, so that's all working as we want. So that looks beautiful. All right, so let's go ahead and let's just close that down now, okay, because I'm done with that. Let's also now, let's imagine that we're moving our machine, or we're moving back to headquarters. Okay, so I'm headed back to headquarters. I'm away from my machine, which has now been commissioned. I still want to be able to access it over WebMI, okay, the machine over WebMI, but now I am physically moving to a new location. So I'm going to unplug. I'm going to simulate that by unplugging from the local area network. And now I'm going to plug into my factory network, which is a totally different network, but it has internet access. So you can see here in the lower right-hand corner that I no longer have a communication with Cscape because of the fact that I'm no longer on the local area network. But when I'm back at the headquarters, I can just change my IP address and resume my connection with the machine if that's what I want to do. So I'm going to go ahead to Controller and Connection Wizard, and I'm going to go ahead and under LAN, now I'm going to plug in the WAN address for my machine, for my or basically for the router. Oops, I got that one wrong. Let's make sure we get the address right. Okay. All right, so there is my internet address. I hit finish, and then boom, there you go. Okay, so this is over the internet, and that's what I'm doing here in my home studio here. This is communicating over the network. It got connected quite quickly. Of course, your results will vary depending on the quality of the cellular connection, but we're online remotely with Cscape. I can go ahead and go into debug mode. You should see a little bit of a lag here while Cscape has to communicate with a little more latency. It's telling me the logic's not equal, so obviously I forgot to do that last download, but for all intents and purposes, it's the same program, and there you go. We're now in debug mode. All right, so I'm able to do Cscape communications just now by accessing the WAN address of the router, and then with appropriate port forwarding of the Cscape port, which is 18501 in the router, it's directing that to the OCS, and I'm good to go. All right, so that is a demonstration of Cscape. Now let's assume that we want to take a look at our WebMI and be able to remotely communicate with WebMI. So let me go ahead and open up this another window in the browser, and this time I'm going to type in the WAN address, not the local area network address. I'll do that, and there we go. Pretty quickly I got prompted to enter my credentials. I enter those in. Now you should notice when I hit sign in here, you should notice a little more latency this time. Okay, 1001, 1002, 1003. So it took a little bit longer, but not bad. Still very, very usable. And again, a little bit more lag there, but hey, we're good to go. We can still go in and change our material here and operate our machine if that's what we've programmed it to do. Again, if we don't want our machine to be run remotely like this, we certainly can set it up so that it can't be. And then we can kick off a batch remotely, which might be the most dangerous thing I'm doing here. Okay, so again, using the WAN address when I'm located away from the machine, now I've got remote connectivity using cellular. All right, so that's terrific. All right, so that's going to wrap up this part of our demo. Let's go ahead and head back to our slides and take a look at what the next demo will be. Okay, so in our next demonstration, we're just going to take it one more step, and that is we're going to have multiple OCSs on the same network. Okay, so that seems simple on the surface, right? No big deal. You're just adding another OCS, and so we can remotely access two OCSs over the internet instead of one. But wait a minute. I've only got one WAN address for that site or for that machine. That's my 166.201 IP address. How do I specify which OCS I'm talking to when we're talking about using WebMI or using Cscape? I want to make sure I'm connected to the right one. How do I access the right one from the internet? Well, as I mentioned, both OCS units are accessed from the same WAN address, but this is where we use something called port mapping, so that for this alternate OCS, the second OCS, that if we want to talk to the second OCS, we use a different port number in our browser with WebMI, and that will allow us to effectively connect to that particular OCS and control that particular OCS. So we're going to use an alternative port number for that second OCS for HTTP, for the WebMI capability. So the standard HTTP port number, if we don't specify a port number in our browser line, if we don't specify it, it's going to use port 80. But we're going to specify port 8080 in our browser at the factory, and then we're going to use port mapping so that when the router sees port 8080 coming in, it will redirect that message to port 80 on the second OCS. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. All right, so let's go back to our bench type scenario here. And now let's bring in the second OCS. So I'm going to go ahead and scoot things a little tighter together here. So now we've got two OCSs. We have our Epoxymatic number 1 and our Epoxymatic number 2. So this is one mobile machine, but we've got two epoxy mixing heads on it. So the latest in technology here. So let's see how we would access the second OCS now. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my local area network. So I'm going to move to the machine so I can make some configuration changes to the machine, and then I'll go back to the factory and test them out. All right, so let's head back to our PC here, and I'm going to fire up my web browser. And this time I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull up the web interface that will allow me to configure the PepLink router. See if I can enter this in properly. All right, that's always a good sign. Okay, so I'm going to go here under Advanced again, and I'm going to add an entry in my port forwarding table. And what I want to do is I want to add a service. The exact details will vary from router to router, manufacturer to manufacturer. Okay, I'm going to name this service. It's just a name I give it. I'm going to call it alternate HTTP. That's what I'm going to call it. Okay? And in this case, we're going to use port mapping because we're going to take one port number that comes into us and we're going to remap it to another device and another port number. Okay? So when port 8080 comes in, that's our alternate for web browsing through WebMI, we're going to go ahead and map that to port 80. It's going to come in over cellular through our cellular address, but we're going to redirect it to our second OCS, which has an IP address that ends in 253. Okay, we're going to save that entry to our port forwarding table. We have to apply the changes, and once we've done that, we're good to go. All right, so again, I'm still parked at the machine making this one change. I don't have to do anything on the OCS side of things. Nothing changes there. Let's go ahead and add another tab here. And I'm going to type in 192.168.50.253. There we go. And remember, because I'm connected to the local address here, the local area network, really all I'm testing is to make sure WebMI is working properly for this second OCS. So again, all I type in is the local LAN address for the second OCS. That happens. It asks me for my username and password. I sign in. Again, very quickly, I get the license page. I continue. Boom. I can do everything I need to do here, including kicking off a batch, and I get really snappy local results here. Okay, so I'm done setting up the router. So now I can move away from the machine back to headquarters. And I'm going to, after I close this down, I'm going to go ahead, I'll go ahead and close this down as well. And now I'm going to do that cable switcheroo, where I'm going to switch from being close to the machine to being back at headquarters. So now I can only talk to the unit over the internet. All right, so let's go ahead and pull up our browser again. All right, and let's try and talk WebMI, but over the internet this time. All right, so let's talk to the first OCS. Let's make sure that one's still working as we want. So that is just the WAN address exactly as is. We hit enter. We don't specify a port number here. And boom, there we go. We are signing in, and we are, after a slight pause, because we are over the internet, after a slight pause, we're back going again. Okay, so this will be the first Epoxymatic, and that'll be obvious because it says Epoxymatic number 1. All right, now let's say we want to talk to the second Epoxymatic. Okay, not the first one, but the second one. Oops, I hit the wrong button there, but that's all right. We'll just open up the browser again. This time I'm still going to specify my internet address. Okay, but I'm also going to specify the port number 8080 with a colon 8080, and enter. And then what's going to happen when I hit enter, that message is going to come in with port 8080 to the router. The router is going to see that 8080. It's going to redirect that message to the second OCS at port 80, and the second OCS should reply, which it looks like it's doing so now. Oops, I should do my credentials right though. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hit sign in, and no, I don't need to save the password. I'm getting a little bit of delay there, which I expected. I accept the license, and hopefully this is Epoxymatic number 2. There it is, and we're good to go. All right, so as you can see, we're able to move back and forth between working on the machine locally by using the LAN address and working on the machine remotely or accessing WebMI remotely using the WAN address. All right, hopefully you found that today's session useful. All right, so as we wrap up today, I want to remind you that we're here every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. We're always standing by to answer your questions from the chat section if you're watching us live. If you're watching us on replay, give us your comments and questions in the comment section, and we'll respond to those just as soon as we can. Okay, so this pretty much wraps up August. We're sitting here at the 30th day of August. But the good news is we've got a full slate of shows for you in September. And September is Hanover Messe USA month. So it's a big month for the Hanover Messe USA trade show. We've got a lot going on at that trade show in September. So we're going to have 3 trade show related shows coming up for you the first 3 weeks in September. So we've got the preview show, which will be next week on Tuesday. A week from that, we'll be live from the show floor in Chicago. We'll see how the cellular connection works there. But don't worry, even if we have to pre-record the live show, you will have full content Tuesday at 2 o'clock, September 13th, with live from Chicago. And then on the 20th, we've also got a show wrap-up. We're going to wrap up the show for you. And then, of course, we'll go back to our regular content starting on the 27th. Okay, so that's exciting stuff. I do want to remind you that if you haven't done so already, don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel. We're creeping up on 1,000 subscribers, which is quite a ways from where we started back, a year or so ago. So again, we do appreciate the time that you spend checking out our content. Hopefully it provides meaningful technical data to you and keeps you informed on Horner products and helps you become a better applications engineer, whether you're using Horner products or even on the projects when you're using other products as well, although we encourage you just to use Horner most of the time. Okay, so until we have our preview show next Tuesday, everybody, let's get out there, let's enjoy the rest of our summer, and let's all do some good.